The cosmos above the desolate expanse of the Aurelian desert churned with the fire and fury of war. Human starfighters clashed with the sleek vessels of the Araxians, laser fire crisscrossing the void in deadly arcs. Amid this chaos, a lone Araxian craft took a direct hit, its wings shearing off as it spiraled toward the planet's surface. Kale, the pilot, fought to maintain consciousness, his training the only bulwark against the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. With the ground racing up to meet him, his life did not flash before his eyes, but rather a single piercing regret: the mission he would leave uncompleted. The ground shook as Kale's fighter bore into the planet's crust, a blackened finger pointing accusingly at the sky from which it fell. In the nearby United Terran Alliance encampment, the human soldiers could only watch the plume of smoke rise in the distance. Sergeant Max Hartfield, a grizzled veteran of these border skirmishes, felt an unfamiliar pull of curiosity over the downed enemy. Ignoring the procedural calls for containment and quarantine, he gathered his team, including medic Leah Benson, a woman whose compassion was as renowned as her skill with a suture. They approached the crash site with weapons drawn, only to find Kale's lifeless body slumped in the wreckage. Despite the protests of his squad and the potential danger, Hartfield couldn't shake the sense of duty that had been ingrained in him from his first day of basic training. No one deserved to die alone, not even an enemy. As they extracted the alien from the smoldering remains of his ship, Leah quickly assessed his condition. The Araxian's physiology was a puzzle, his body a fusion of flesh and advanced biomechanics that Leah's medical training was ill-prepared to address. But beneath the alien armor and stoic mask of his unconscious face, she saw something universally recognizable: the will to survive. Leah worked tirelessly through the night, stabilizing Kale with a mix of human ingenuity and makeshift adaptations of the alien's own medical technology. The morning light brought with it a sense of cautious hope as Kale's vital signs began to stabilize. Hartfield watched the alien, his mind a turmoil of conflicting emotions: admiration for Leah's undeniable skill, suspicion of the alien's intentions, and a soldier's pragmatic caution against the unknown. Yet, as dawn broke over the encampment, it was not a battle cry that rang out, but the steady beep of a heart monitor, signifying that the enemy soldier, their unexpected ward, clung fiercely to life. The Araxian craft, now a smoldering ruin nestled in the arms of the Aurelian desert, had been reduced to twisted metal and blackened circuitry, a grave marker of interstellar conflict. Its once sleek form, designed for the elegance of dogfighting and the dance of death in the vacuum of space, lay broken, a stark testament to the frailty of even the most formidable technologies when pitted against the merciless onslaught of war. Sergeant Max Hartfield and his squad stood at the periphery of the crash site, the acrid stench of burning alloy filling their nostrils. Each of them, from the rawest private to the most seasoned corporal, carried the weight of the moment with a somber gravity. Hartfield, his eyes a mirror of the desert's endless expanse, surveyed the wreck with a tactical eye. He'd been through enough skirmishes to recognize the delicate line between prudence and necessary risk. As the dust settled, there was no movement from the alien craft, no signs of life. The silence was an oppressive shroud over the desert. His decision to defy orders and venture to the crash was not made lightly, but the sergeant was guided by a moral compass that often veered away from the strict directives of military protocol. There was an unspoken rule in the wasteland of war, a code that transcended the divide between friend and foe. You do not leave the wounded to the vultures, not when you have the power to intervene. Leah Benson, her medical pack slung over one shoulder, moved past the onlookers and toward the wreckage. Her hands, steadied by an inner calm that belied the chaos around her, were ready to heal, to bring back from the brink of the abyss those whose lives hung in the balance. The alien pilot, should he be alive, would be no different in her eyes than any human soldier she had treated. Life, she held, was a sacred flame that burned within all beings, regardless of origin. The extraction was methodical, with the soldiers using hydraulic cutters and winches to peel away the alien ship's carcass. And there, amid the ruin, lay Kale, an Araxian pilot whose reputation among his kind was that of a formidable warrior, unbeaten in combat. His body, clad in the biometallic suit of his people, was still, the only sign of life the faint pulsing of light at his chest, a beacon of life force within the armor. As Hartfield's team secured the perimeter, Leah knelt beside the alien, her fingers deftly probing the suit for an access point. The technology was unfamiliar, but the principles of medicine remained unchanged. Find the wound, stop the bleeding, stabilize the patient. These were the tenets that guided her actions, even as she worked to save a life that, under any other circumstances, would be considered the enemy. The sky lightened to a soft hue as the two moons of the planet began their descent, and as the stars faded, so too did the line between ally and adversary. Under Leah's care, Kale's breathing grew more stable, the alien's own systems responding to her ministrations. With each passing moment, the improbable became possible. A life was being pulled from the jaws of death, not with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel, but with the warm grasp of compassion. The squad looked on, a mixture of awe and unease etched into their faces as they watched their medic work. For many, it was the first time they had seen an Araxian up close, the first time they had seen their enemy as anything but a target in their sights. And as the sun crested the horizon, casting its first light upon the desert's expanse, it also illuminated a truth that each person present would carry with them, that the battlefield has the power to strip away our preconceptions, revealing the core of our shared existence, our humanity. As the alien's steady breathing punctuated the stillness of the early morning, Sergeant Hartfield and his team stood guard over the makeshift medical bay that had been Leah's operating theater under the stars. The tension among the soldiers had morphed from one of anticipation to a contemplative silence. They had all witnessed their fair share of wonders and horrors that stretched across the galaxies, but nothing quite like this, saving the life of one who had been born of a distant star. The desert sun cast long shadows over the encampment, the light glinting off the canvas of tents and the assortment of military vehicles that had seen better days. Hartfield watched as the members of his squad moved around the camp, performing their morning routines with a mechanical efficiency that betrayed none of the thoughts that surely swirled in their heads. There was an unspoken question hanging in the air, a lingering doubt about what the future held now that they had an Araxian breathing amongst them. In the medical tent, the silence was broken only by the sounds of Leah's movements as she continued to tend to Kale. The alien's recovery was a marvel of her skill and adaptability, the product of her intense focus and the swaths of medical texts she had consumed during her training, texts that had never once mentioned the physiology of an Araxian. Yet her intuition and the guiding principles of medicine had served her well. Kale's alien anatomy had responded to her treatments, and his condition had stabilized far beyond what anyone could have expected. The medic's brow was furrowed as she monitored the readouts on her equipment, watching the lines and numbers that told the story of Kale's life force. She was acutely aware of the significance of her patient, of the eyes that periodically glanced through the tent flaps to observe the interstellar patient who, for a brief moment, had become the center of their universe. The first time Kale opened his eyes, the medic was there, her presence a calming force amidst the disorientation of awakening in a foreign place. His vision was blurred, the outlines of the human figure before him a hazy silhouette against the bright light of the tent. But it was the voice that cut through the fog, a soft and steady stream of words in his own tongue that welcomed him back to consciousness. Leah had learned a few phrases from the universal translator, enough to reassure and to soothe. The conversation that followed was halting, a clumsy dance between two beings seeking understanding across the chasm that separated their worlds. Kale learned of his rescue, of the humans who had defied their own survival instincts to save an alien life, and as he listened, a grudging respect began to form within him, a respect for these humans who showed kindness when none was expected. Outside, the day began to heat the desert sands, and the camp stirred with life as supply convoys arrived and patrols set out. Hartfield continued to watch, his thoughts as unreadable as the stoic expression he wore like a mask. But beneath that facade, the sergeant was grappling with the decision he had made, wondering if it was compassion or folly that had led him to save the alien pilot. The morning passed into afternoon, and Kale's strength began to return. With each passing hour, the lines of worry on Leah's face eased, and the soldiers of the camp began to accept the presence of the Araxian among them. It was an uneasy truce, one that hung delicately in the balance, but it was a start that could change the course of the war, the course of their lives, and perhaps the course of history itself. Under the sterile white light of the medical tent, the Araxian soldier known to his kin as Kale, and to these humans now as a reluctant guest, stirred with the restlessness of the confined. His body was still a patchwork of bruises and bandages, but it was his mind that bore the greater wounds. Memories of the battle, the suffocating dark of unconsciousness, and now the piercing clarity of his current predicament. Kale sat up with a fluid grace that betrayed none of his internal turmoil, his eyes, reflecting a universe of thought, fixed upon Leah, who was quietly cataloging medical supplies. His voice, when he finally broke the silence, held the gravelly tones of his homeworld. Why? It was a simple question, yet it carried the weight of countless implications. Why had they saved him, an enemy combatant, when the laws of war would have allowed them to leave him to the harsh mercy of the desert? Leah paused, her hands stilling among the gauze and tape. She turned to meet his gaze, her own eyes unflinching. "Because it was the right thing to do," she answered, her voice steady. "War is war, but life is precious." It was a sentiment not often expressed in the theater of war, where life and death were traded like currency, but it was one she held to as firmly as she did her scalpel. The exchange was interrupted by the entrance of Sergeant Hartfield, his head bowed slightly to avoid the tent flap. His eyes quickly took in the scene, the Araxian sitting upright, the medic at her makeshift supply table. "You're awake," he stated, a fact so obvious it almost bordered on the nonsensical, yet it broke the thick atmosphere, allowing conversation to flow more freely. Hartfield briefed Kale on their situation. The Araxian fleet had retreated, folding back into the cosmos from whence they came, leaving no indication of their plans. For now, this planet was a quiet pocket in the storm of intergalactic conflict, a brief respite from the ceaseless drum of war. They were behind enemy lines, the sergeant explained, but for the moment they were not engaged in battle. As the afternoon gave way to evening, Kale grappled with the duality of his circumstances. He had been trained to view humans as the adversaries, the usurpers of peace, the bringers of chaos. Yet here he was, not only tended to with care, but conversed with as an individual, not an enemy. He could not reconcile the teachings of his commanders with the actions of these people before him. It was a rift that widened with each act of kindness he observed, with each shared look that said, "You are not alone." That night, as Kale lay in the cot, he realized that his world had irrevocably changed, not by the might of human weapons, but by the strength of human compassion. It was a realization both humbling and profound. For the first time since his ship had been caught in the fierce gravity of this planet, Kale felt the stirrings of something other than loyalty to his people or duty to his mission. He felt the beginnings of gratitude, a sensation as foreign to him as the soil beneath this makeshift human encampment. And as he drifted into a fitful sleep, he understood that the battle for his convictions had only just begun. As dawn crept over the encampment, casting a soft glow on the fabric of the medical tent, Kale found himself at the precipice of a decision. The night had been long, filled with the ghosts of memories and the whisper of new thoughts that challenged everything he had known. The humans, particularly Leah and Hartfield, had shown him a side of the species he had been conditioned to hate, a side that spoke of empathy, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to life. With the morning light came a meeting, orchestrated by Hartfield, intended to bridge the gap between Kale and the rest of the human soldiers. The sergeant believed that understanding was the foundation upon which peace could be built, even if it was just a temporary truce in the vastness of interstellar conflict. As Kale stepped out of the medical tent, his gaze swept over the faces of those who had once been faceless enemies. Now he saw individuals, each with their own stories etched into the lines of their faces. The meeting was held outside under the open sky, a neutral ground where the air wasn't stifled by the confines of tents or the remnants of war. Hartfield began with an introduction, reminding his team and Kale of their common goal, survival. Then, one by one, the soldiers shared stories of home, of the reasons they fought, and of the dreams that kept them going through the darkest times. The tales were varied, reflecting the diversity of humanity itself, but a single thread wove through them all: hope. When it was Kale's turn to speak, he hesitated, the weight of his words pressing down upon him. He spoke of Araxia, his homeworld, describing its vast deserts and towering cities that reached towards the stars. He spoke of his people, their culture, their values, and the unfortunate circumstances that had led them to war. It wasn't a justification of the conflict, but rather an explanation of the complexity of his world, much like the stories shared by the humans. As the day wore on, what had started as a formal meeting transformed into a gathering of individuals sharing a moment of peace amidst chaos. Cale, who had stood apart, now found himself part of a circle, a symbol of unity that transcended the boundaries of species. The soldiers in turn saw not just an alien, but a person with hopes, fears, and a love for his home, mirroring their own feelings. The interaction didn't erase the war, nor did it solve the deep-seated issues between their species, but it planted a seed of understanding. Cale realized that the humans were not the monsters he had been taught to see. They were fighters, yes, but they were also healers, dreamers, and protectors of life. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert, a sense of camaraderie settled over the group. They were still soldiers, bound by duty to potentially opposing sides, but for a brief moment in time they were just beings, sharing stories under the vast expanse of the cosmos. Cale understood then that peace was not just the absence of war, but the presence of understanding and respect. It was a lesson he would carry with him, a beacon of hope in the uncharted territories of conflict and reconciliation. The newfound camaraderie that blossomed in the heart of the desert was not without its challenges. As the days passed, the practicalities of their situation began to press in. Supplies were dwindling, and the human squad, along with Cale, faced the looming threat of discovery by both human and Araxian forces. It was a delicate balance, maintaining the secrecy of their encampment while planning for what came next. Sergeant Hartfield and Cale, now unlikely allies, spent hours poring over maps and satellite imagery, plotting courses that avoided known patrol routes and conflict zones. Their discussions were a melding of minds, with Cale's intimate knowledge of Araxian strategies complementing Hartfield's guerrilla tactics. The objective was clear: reach the nearest United Terran Alliance outpost to secure safe passage for Cale back to Araxian space, a gesture of goodwill that could potentially open a dialogue between the two warring factions. The operation required precision and a bit of luck. They decided on a night maneuver, under the cover of darkness to minimize detection. The squad's tech specialist, Corporal Jensen, rigged up a makeshift communication jammer, hoping to buy them some time against any electronic surveillance. Meanwhile, Leah, ever the medic, prepared first aid kits, her hands moving with practiced ease, though her heart was heavy with the knowledge of the dangers they faced. The night before their departure was a somber affair. The soldiers gathered around a small fire, the flickering flames casting shadows on their faces. They shared stories again, but this time with a sense of urgency, a recognition of the peril they were about to face. Cale, too, felt the weight of the moment, understanding the risk these humans were taking for his sake. In the tradition of his people, he offered a song, a mournful melody that spoke of valor, loss, and the hope of seeing one's home once more. It was a gift of gratitude, his voice weaving through the cool night air, touching each listener with a solemn reverence. The journey began under a crescent moon, the desert landscape a tapestry of shadow and light. They moved in silence, a column of ghosts drifting through the sands. Cale, though still not fully recovered, kept pace, his determination fueled by the solidarity of his companions. The terrain was unforgiving, but the resolve of the squad was unyielding, each member driven by a shared purpose that transcended individual survival. As they neared the outpost, the tension among them grew. The risk of discovery was at its peak, the stakes higher than they had ever been. Hartfield signaled a halt, his hand raised in a fist. They were close now, close enough to see the perimeter defenses of the outpost. It was Jensen who broke the silence, his voice a whisper in the dark. "We're not alone." Eyes strained in the darkness, and then they saw them, a patrol unit, their outlines barely discernible against the night. It was Cale who acted first, stepping forward with his hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. The squad tensed, ready to defend, but Hartfield held them back. They watched as Cale spoke, his words lost to the distance, but his intent clear. There was a long moment of uncertainty, where every breath felt like an eternity, and then the patrol unit lowered their weapons, their body language shifting from confrontation to curiosity. The exchange that followed was tense but ultimately fruitful. Cale's presence, once a potential catalyst for conflict, proved to be the bridge that Hartfield had hoped for. The patrol unit agreed to escort them to the outpost, a decision that was as much about the curiosity of Cale's story as it was about the respect they had for Hartfield's squad. As they entered the outpost, Cale flanked by human soldiers, it was clear that this was a turning point. They had achieved the impossible, a testament to the power of unity in the face of adversity. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with diplomatic challenges and potential backlash. But in that moment, as dawn broke over the horizon, there was hope, a hope for peace, born out of the sands of a desert planet, nurtured by the bravery of those who dared to see beyond the enemy lines. In the dimly lit briefing room of the United Terran Alliance outpost, a fragile silence hung over the assembly of high-ranking officers and diplomatic envoys. The centerpiece of their focus was Cale, the Araxian soldier, standing with an unassuming dignity next to Sergeant Hartfield. The air was thick with skepticism and curiosity, a potent mix that reflected the unprecedented nature of their meeting. Cale's recounting of the events leading to his rescue and subsequent journey to the outpost was delivered with a calm clarity. His voice, though carrying the accent of his people, resonated with a sincerity that was hard to dismiss. He spoke not only of the conflict that had torn through the stars, but also of the moments of humanity that had pierced the veil of war. The story of his rescue, the shared stories around a desert fire, and the solemn song of his people offered a glimpse into the potential for understanding between their species. The reaction among the human officials was mixed, with some viewing Cale's presence as a tactical advantage, a source of invaluable intelligence about the enemy. Others, influenced by Hartfield's unwavering support, saw a rare opportunity for diplomacy, a chance to broker a peace that had seemed impossible amidst the ceaseless conflict. The discussions that followed were intense, a cacophony of voices each vying for dominance. Arguments were made, strategies debated, and the potential ramifications of this encounter dissected from every conceivable angle. Through it all, Hartfield remained a steadfast advocate for peace, his conviction bolstered by the bond formed in the crucible of the desert. Leah, too, lent her voice to the chorus, her perspective as a medic offering a poignant reminder of the cost of war, not in abstract terms, but in the very real currency of lives lost and futures shattered. It was a turning point when the commanding general of the outpost, swayed by the narrative laid before him and the undeniable evidence of Cale's humanity, made a decision. He proposed a ceasefire, a brief pause in the hostilities to explore the possibility of dialogue with the Araxians, using Cale's return to his people as the opening gambit in a larger diplomatic effort. The plan was audacious, fraught with risk, but it carried the potential for a historic peace. Preparations began immediately, with Hartfield and his squad playing a central role. They were tasked with escorting Cale to the designated meeting point, a neutral space where representatives of both species could convene. The mission was a testament to the trust and respect that had developed between the human soldiers and the Araxian warrior, a bond forged in the shared belief that peace was worth pursuing. As the day of the meeting approached, the outpost buzzed with activity. Security protocols were reviewed, diplomatic entreaties prepared, and every possible outcome planned for. Cale, for his part, remained composed, his resolve unshaken even in the face of returning to his people under such extraordinary circumstances. He had seen the best and worst of both worlds, and in the hearts of those who had been his enemies, he had found hope. The journey to the meeting point was undertaken with a solemn sense of purpose. Hartfield and his squad, accompanied by Cale and a contingent of diplomatic officers, moved through the stars with the weight of history upon them. They were not just soldiers and envoys. They were pioneers venturing into the unknown, carrying with them the fragile hope of countless lives. As the ships docked at the neutral station, a hush fell over the assembled crew. The moment had arrived, a moment that could mark the beginning of the end of a long and bitter conflict. Cale stepped forward, the first to disembark, his figure a lone silhouette against the backdrop of the station. He was the herald of a new dawn, an emissary of peace in a galaxy that had known too much war. The doors of the station opened, and Cale stepped into the light, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The neutral station, suspended in the vast emptiness of space between the territories of the United Terran Alliance and the Araxian Dominion, was a monument to the possibility of peace. Its architecture was a blend of human and Araxian design, a symbolic gesture meant to foster a sense of unity and shared purpose. As Cale, flanked by Hartfield and the diplomatic envoy, walked through its corridors, the weight of his mission pressed heavily upon him. The meeting room was a circular chamber, its walls transparent to reveal the breathtaking tapestry of space beyond. Representatives from both sides had already assembled, their expressions a mix of cautious optimism and underlying tension. The Araxian delegation was the first to rise, their eyes fixed on Cale. To them, he was both a familiar face and a harbinger of change, his presence a testament to the unforeseen bridges that courage and compassion could build. Cale's greeting to his people was formal, yet tinged with emotion. As he spoke, his voice carried not just his own hopes, but those of the humans who had risked everything for this moment of peace. He recounted his journey, from the battle-scarred deserts of the contested planet to the medical tent where human hands had healed him, and finally to the shared purpose that had guided him and Hartfield's team through the darkness. The humans listened, their attention unwavering, as Cale wove the narrative of their shared ordeal, highlighting the moments of understanding and common humanity that had emerged from the crucible of conflict. Hartfield, standing beside Cale, represented not just the military might of humanity, but its capacity for empathy and peace. The discussions that followed were long and fraught with complexity. Both sides laid bare their grievances, their losses, and their fears. Yet, in the shadow of Cale's story, these admissions took on a new light. They were not accusations, but acknowledgments of shared suffering, an understanding that the cycle of violence had taken its toll on both sides. Gradually, the conversation shifted from recriminations to possibilities. The ceasefire, initially proposed as a temporary measure, became the foundation for a more robust armistice. Details were debated, compromises forged, and a framework for peace began to emerge, delicate and untested but real. As the meeting drew to a close, an agreement was reached, a ceasefire to be followed by negotiations for a lasting peace. The document, when it was finally signed, represented more than a pause in hostilities. It was a commitment to explore a future where war was no longer the first recourse. Cale and Hartfield, once adversaries, now stood together as the architects of this fragile first step towards peace. The handshake they shared was broadcast across the galaxy, a symbol of the potential for reconciliation and understanding. They had crossed the vast divide between their peoples, driven by the belief that peace was not only possible, but necessary. The journey back to the contested planet, the site of their first fateful encounter, was a quiet one. Each member of the mission, human and Araxian alike, was lost in thought, pondering the significance of what they had achieved. They had ventured into the unknown, guided by a shared vision of peace, and emerged with the promise of a new beginning. The sun was setting over the desert as they landed, casting long shadows across the sands that had once been a battlefield. As Cale and Hartfield stepped onto the planet's surface, they looked upon a landscape that bore the scars of war, but held the promise of regeneration. In the silence of the desert, the peace they had fought for seemed both fragile and enduring, a testament to the power of hope in the face of despair. Their mission had ended, but the journey towards peace was just beginning. It would be a path fraught with challenges and setbacks, but the agreement they had brokered was a beacon, illuminating the way forward. In the years to come, the story of their unlikely alliance would be told and retold, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity and empathy could prevail. As the stars began to emerge in the twilight sky, Cale and Hartfield looked out into the vastness of space, their thoughts turning to the future. They had faced the unknown together, and emerged not just as survivors, but as beacons of hope for their people. The peace they had forged was their legacy, a bridge across the stars built on the foundation of mutual respect and shared humanity. The cosmos, that the significance of their journey crystallized. They stood at the precipice of change, not just for their own generations, but for countless ones to come. The peace accord, freshly signed, was now a beacon of hope in the darkness of space, a testament to the power of unity and understanding. Cale turned to Hartfield, his expression one of solemn gratitude. "What we have started here," he began, his voice steady and infused with emotion, "transcends the boundaries of our worlds. It is a promise for our future." Hartfield nodded, the weight of their shared experiences etching a deep bond between them. "It's a new beginning," he agreed, one that we'll defend no matter what comes. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their respective delegations, ready to escort them back to their homeworlds. The moment of reflection had passed, but the resolve it forged within them remained steadfast. As they parted ways, a silent vow was exchanged, a vow to uphold the fragile peace they had crafted, against any odds. The journey back to their respective territories was a contemplation of the path ahead. For Kale, it was a return to a society where he would now be a harbinger of change, advocating for peace in a culture honed by centuries of conflict. The challenge was daunting, but the Araxian soldier was buoyed by the support of those who had witnessed the sincerity of their efforts, those who believed in the possibility of a shared future. Hartfield faced a different trial. He was returning to a military that had been defined by its opposition to the Araxians, now tasked with fostering an alliance with them. His leadership and conviction would be crucial in navigating the complexities of peace, a peace that would require as much courage to maintain as it had to achieve. As their ships docked at their respective homeworlds, the reception was mixed. There were those who greeted them with skepticism, unable to see past the long history of animosity. Yet there were also those who welcomed the promise of peace, eager for an end to the cycle of violence. In the days that followed, Kale and Hartfield embarked on their most challenging mission yet, to be ambassadors of peace in a time of transition. They addressed councils, met with leaders, and spoke to the people, sharing the story of their unlikely alliance and the common ground they had found. They faced opposition, mistrust, and countless challenges, but with each step, they forged a little more understanding, a little more hope. The road to peace was long and fraught with setbacks, but also marked by small victories and moments of shared triumph. The ceasefire held, gradually morphing into a tentative truce as diplomatic relations began to take shape. Joint initiatives were launched, focusing on trade, scientific collaboration, and cultural exchange, laying the groundwork for a lasting peace. Years later, the anniversary of the peace accord was commemorated on both worlds. Kale and Hartfield, older now and bearing the marks of their efforts, stood together once more. This time they addressed a united assembly, a gathering that would have been unimaginable before their journey began. Their message was one of reflection on the journey they had undertaken, a tribute to the countless individuals who had worked tirelessly for peace, and a reminder of the work still ahead. Peace, Kale stated, is not a moment but a continuous effort, a garden that needs tending to grow. Hartfield added, and it's worth every effort, for the future we build today is the legacy we leave for tomorrow. As they concluded, the assembly rose in a standing ovation, not just for Kale and Hartfield, but for the enduring spirit of peace they represented. The journey from enemies to allies, from war to peace, was their shared legacy, a beacon of hope for a galaxy in search of light. The legacy of peace forged by Kale and Hartfield, once unlikely allies, now stood as a testament to the potential for reconciliation and unity across the cosmos. The anniversary of the peace accord was not just a celebration of their historic achievement, but a reminder of the continuous effort required to maintain and nurture this hard-won peace. In the years following the accord, the galaxy witnessed an unprecedented era of cooperation. The exchange programs initiated between the United Terran Alliance and the Araxian Dominion flourished, fostering a deep cultural understanding and mutual respect among their peoples. Young generations grew up knowing not the animosity and fear that had once fueled endless cycles of conflict, but the stories of bravery, empathy, and the pursuit of peace that had reshaped their worlds. The establishment of the Intergalactic Peace Foundation, co-founded by Kale and Hartfield, became a cornerstone of their legacy. The foundation worked tirelessly to mediate conflicts, support post-war reconstruction efforts, and promote peace education throughout the galaxy. Its emblem, a symbol of two hands clasped in unity, became a beacon of hope in troubled regions, embodying the spirit of cooperation that Kale and Hartfield had championed. As they grew older, Kale and Hartfield took on the role of mentors, sharing their experiences with a new generation of leaders and diplomats. Their story, documented in holobooks and taught in classrooms across the galaxy, served as a powerful lesson on the transformative power of understanding and the importance of reaching out across divides. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Pockets of resistance and old prejudices lingered, threatening to unravel the fabric of peace that had been so carefully woven. Yet each time the peace was tested, the response was swift and united, a reflection of the strong foundations laid by those who believed in a better future. On a personal level, Cale and Hartfield continued to share a bond that transcended their official roles. Their friendship, born out of adversity and cemented through shared purpose, remained a source of strength and inspiration for both. They often met, whether for official ceremonies or quiet reflection, to discuss the evolving landscape of intergalactic relations and the ongoing efforts to sustain peace. Their final project, the creation of the Museum of Galactic Peace on a neutral planet, was a tribute to the countless individuals who had contributed to the peace process. The museum housed artifacts, stories, and interactive exhibits that chronicled the journey from conflict to peace, including the personal memorabilia of Cale and Hartfield. It stood as a living history lesson, emphasizing the cost of war and the priceless value of peace. In the twilight of their years, at the unveiling of the museum, Cale and Hartfield addressed a diverse crowd, their faces illuminated by the setting sun of the neutral planet. "This museum is not a monument to our achievements," Cale said, his voice resonant with age but still carrying the strength of his convictions, "but a reminder of our collective responsibility to preserve and protect the peace we have built together." Hartfield, standing by his side, added, "Let this place be a crossroads of cultures, ideas, and dreams for a peaceful future. Our journey is a testament to what can be achieved when we choose to see beyond our differences and work together for the greater good." As the audience applauded, the two old friends shared a look of quiet satisfaction. They had witnessed the dawn of a new era, one they had helped usher in through their unwavering commitment to peace. Their legacy, encapsulated in the Museum of Galactic Peace, would continue to inspire generations long after they were gone, a beacon of hope in the vast expanse of space. Cale and Hartfield's story, a narrative of transformation from enemies to architects of peace, continued to resonate, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the light of hope, understanding, and unity could drive back the shadows of conflict. Their journey was a testament to the belief that peace was not only possible but achievable, one step at a time.